thinking of experiencing a piece, a music piece, for me somehow everything becomes part of that experience and part of the experiencing. And space-time in which this is happening is really important. Obviously time, but also space and everything that's about that environment, the atmosphere. And this is important for every piece, and once being conscious of it, you can then decide whether you want to try and block some aspects of that or you want to include them. But when it comes to a music theory piece, I think it's extremely important to emphasize and aid being conscious of these elements that are part of the structure of the space of the building. And when you think of that, and especially within the piece, the play we did with Johannes, which was working and searching through the philosophy of sound, the philosophy of instrument, the history of instrument, it made sense that everything has to be part of the experiencing of the play, including that the stage and the space itself has to become an instrument. So everything that's going to be part of this instrument becomes a potential sound. Everything has to be sound, and not necessarily an instrument that produces sound, but really an embodiment of sound itself. And hence the birth of the humongous sound wave, because what else can better represent the presence of physical presence of sound, which is not being heard but seen. We can't see a sound wave, we can't touch it, but somehow if we could, it would be nice. So having this huge, humongous sound wave seemed very appropriate for this play, and it was very fun to make. But then other objects as well had to somehow be part of this whole story. And there was a lot of actual instruments present on the stage, but they would not necessarily be played and utilized in a way that we would use, that we are used to hearing sound from them. So everything about the play became this investigation in play between what is instrument, when is instrument, what is sound, when is sound, what is sounding. And somehow I wanted to incorporate that into the scenography, as if the scenography itself would be a performance of music, a musical performance. So each object somehow had to have some element or all elements, but just seen from a different perspective. If you would think about color and timbre and that for me became the color and the texture, and the materials that I used were also quite important then. The play itself, the script itself, was a inspiration for thinking and for imagining and for creating. And sentences like we can hear the string as sound, the vibration of the string as sound, because the air is invisible. There's something so poetic and so intriguing about that sentence that you immediately start to think, wait, the air is invisible, but we are present in it and we can feel it, and then the sound is invisible, but we can hear it, and that there is that physicality of the sound. And then things like sometimes you play the instrument and sometimes the instrument plays you. So again, all of these things were constantly this back and forth between what is the sound the product of an instrument, or is the instrument product of the sound's necessity to physically exist in space that we perceive. And another inspiration were Johannes's sheet music pieces, because they themselves embody this constant play between something that should exist in a certain form that we expect, but it actually can't. So they can't be played, but you can imagine them sounding in your head. And then it was so obvious that they have to be part of the play, but not in a form of being on a white paper as their sheet music is usually represented. But how can they become physically present and be somehow, as sound is something that is present yet not present, and something that we question and that tickles our imagination? So the transparent sheet seemed appropriate because not to every angle you see clearly their presence and what is on it, and yet from some angles it's extremely present and it's so clear what it is, and it just seemed so perfect to combine these two things and to somehow suspend music notation in space, music notation which we use to record sound without it being audio recorded, and then to have just this seem to float in space somehow was seemed as a good part and good representation of what the atmosphere and what should trigger the imagination of a person who's listening and seeing the play. Initially, for the cubes that had symbols of a whole note, I thought, perfect use for black 2.0, a color that is 95 unreflective and that gives flatness to even three-dimensional objects, because it kind of has this metaphor of sheet music and ink on paper being flat. But then when assembly of sheet music pieces for the transparent sheets became what is it going to be for this occasion, there was something so humanoid about this assembly that they seemed like a creature that was just trying to present itself to us through using the symbols, the music notation, and somehow flatness and the diminishing of the third dimension that this black color is perfect for seemed totally inappropriate, because these needed liveliness, these needed relief, they needed some sort of texture to them as well. So a different color was used for them, and I think successfully so. And then the transparent sheets that I used were acrylic sheets, and they make this wonderful sound. It's like this thunder sound, and this thunder is sort of a hidden feature that they have, and again a perfect mixture of what a sound can be. It can be very fragile and it can disappear in an instant, yet in the same time, that moment when it appears, it can be a force of nature that can totally shake you up, and so that kind of hidden feature that was in them seemed like a superpower that they have. And same transparent sheets were used for Piano Garden, and Piano Garden was in a way representing also this solid material of which instruments are made of, like piano keys are made out of wood and ivory, and these are all solid materials, yet here you have them as with this transparency, and there is when we interact with an instrument, we have a whole spectrum of ways that we interact, that we touch. There's this tactility that can be very gentle, very careful, and there's this but there is also a force with which we need to interact with. And yet when there were these transparent sheets, then they embodied this same thing because of the transparency, which sort of embodies the fragility, but there is this sound that they hold, this is these thunders that they can produce, which is the force that is also there in gestures when we interact with an instrument. And this kind of played perfectly within the play, and there is a scene where Johannes and Arno are running and they're having a fight, and there is some instruments are being used within this, and suddenly they find themselves within the piano garden, and this sort of a zen place where you just would imagine the sound, would just meditate, suddenly becomes this energy ball which is going to burst. And then they actually do burst out of it by breaking down the piano garden walls, and they do start to make this sound, and it amplifies the whole scene. So this hidden feature that they had kind of became part of the for me became a really crucial part of this scene of how the space and the objects and the content and everything that is abstract and tangible can actually interact and become part of a piece. So in this respect, then we had a flatness in the color, and then this one also had the texture and the sound that was hidden within. There were other objects that were crucial to the scene. One of them also came from the sheet music initially, and that was the piano, the whole note table. And the whole note is constantly present in sheet music, and in sheet music pieces especially. But I'm speaking like sheet music is just music in general, and it's always somehow related to staff lines. When I started thinking of three-dimensionalizing a whole note, I kind of still encounter a problem of, not a problem, but the challenge of how next I'm going to do it. Because where is this hole located in a whole note, and which part is solid and which is hollow? So this is still a big question. But when it is connected to a staff line, then it suddenly became this shape which kind of represents an object that we can place. And then when it was placed and made, it was a table or something that we can place other things on. And when there is a table, then chairs wouldn't be a far-fetched thing to imagine. Initially, the first thought of a chair would be, for me, a flat, because it has that kind of a shape that you would think, oh, you could kind of fit there, and there's like a thing you can lean on, and because of its instability, you would think that it can also be like a rocking chair. But all of that, it kind of symbolizes something more mellow, something calmer. And then going back to the script and the places and the moments where this was used, it kind of needed some sort of agitation, something that would keep the action on, something that would keep the posture and the body in this constant state of alertness. And somehow a sharp has that, and sharp would become a stool, and the way that you would even sit on a stool is something that you are in a constant state of alertness, and that kind of seemed more appropriate for this occasion. And each of these objects had to have a possibility to be moved, both because of how the play was unfolding, but there was another layer to their mobility, is that sound and instruments, they move, they change, they have these metamorphoses to them, and the sound especially is just present in that moment that we hear it. So the possibility of these objects to move around or to be destroyed and sort of break out of themselves, it made them simply closer to being music and being sound just by existing in their shape and form that they are. And then it was also practical. There were also practical reasons of what they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to be incorporated and how the scene was supposed to be used.